Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Health and Wellness Talk Series. Today's talk is titled The Neuroscience of Selfless Service. In this talk, I'm going to cover the following aspects. What exactly is selfless service? How selfless service affects the emotions, the mind, and the body? How optimal immunity, good health, and wellness are achieved through selfless service? And what is the neurochemical basis of selfless service. So with that, let me go ahead and share the slides. So I hope you can see the slides. So the one common question that we keep getting asked or that we keep asking ourselves is, what is the panacea or the best solution for optimal health and wellness? And how do you get rid of suffering? And how can we always be at peace? It is a fair question. Now, the way to experience optimal health and wellness, the way to reduce suffering, and the way to be always at peace is to ensure that our mind and body are functioning as one entity, or they're functioning as one unit 24/7. By maintaining this mind body nexus at all times, our life will be more peaceful, vibrant, and healthy. This mind body nexus is what I call as an unfractionated living or a wholesome life. This is what leads to a harmonious life with significantly increased protection from illness and disease. Now, the question is, how do you achieve this state of oneness of the mind and body? One of the tools in my book, Good Living Practices, I mentioned hundreds of tools. One of the tools to achieve the mind-body oneness in order to experience optimal immunity, good health, and wellness is selfless service. Now, in the Vedic texts, selfless service is referred to as karma yoga or nishkamya seva. And modern psychological definition of selfless service is any ethically fine-tuned action where the doer downplays one's own exclusive role or one's own exclusive interests and instead considers the interest of the receiver impartially and non-judgmentally, and then does the right thing. So just remember, a selfless service is one where the doer acts and does his or her duty, whether that be as a homemaker, a parent, a nurse, a carpenter, a garbage collector, or any other task, with no thought for one's own fame, privilege, or financial reward, but simply as a service to society and mankind and for their benefit. Now, based on both the definitions from the psychological aspect and from scriptural aspects, it is very clear that selfless service means an action where the doer is not looking for any rewards, the doer is not looking for any recognition, the doer is not looking for any fame, the doer is not expecting any awards. So, which means there's no expectations of any sorts. And there's no judgment attached to the selfless service. In other words, you must have no expectations before or after rendering the selfless service, and you must remain unaffected by the results while maintaining a loving attitude. If you're not happy in doing the act, or if you're not loving that particular selfless act, or if you're doing the act out of a sense of compulsion, or if you're doing it as a means to achieve fame or prosperity, then this creates an emotional turmoil and conflict in the mind. Thus, such a service or such an act that is rendered is no longer selfless. So please remember, any ethically fine-tuned actions that are done without any expectations and without any egoistic tendencies is a selfless service. Now, when we talk about selfless service, remember this quality needs to be inculcated at the level of the mind and at the level of the body. All right. So when we talk about the level of the mind, we're talking about selfless through thoughts and emotions, and at the level of the body, selfless through actual physical work. So the question is, how do you perform selflessness at the level of mind and emotions? So please remember, we are a result of all our thoughts and emotions. Thoughts and emotions, they mold us, they transform us, and through them, we act physically. So those whose minds are shaped by selfless thoughts, they provide true meaning to their life when they speak or when they act. Now, selflessness at the level of thoughts and emotions is exhibiting or expressing happiness, loving kindness, maitri karuna, fulfillment, contentment, and joy, santosha, anytime and every time, non-judgmentally and without any expectation. Now, possessing the ability to forgive is one important selfless act. Forgiveness, also known as kshama, is mentioned as one of the 10 yamas by Yajnavalkya in the Yajnavalkya Smriti. Forgiveness or kshama is also mentioned in the Sandilya and the Varaha Upanishads. It's also mentioned in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika by Swatmarama. Kshama or forgiveness is a great selfless act at the level of mind and emotions. Even if someone's actions or someone's words have severely impacted your life in a negative way, it would benefit both you and the other person if you forgive rather than harboring any vengeance or any resentment. In the same way, smiling is another selfless act at the level of mind and emotions. So start your day with a smile and keep that smile of yours throughout the day. Let it not be a forced smile. It needs to be a genuine smile, which in itself is a selfless act at the level of mind. When you smile, remember the world smiles with you. Now, countless studies have shown that these traits like forgiveness and smiling not only increases the level of comfort and happiness, but it also places you and all the others in a positive mood. So in the end, both forgiveness and smiling and similar other attitudes are a win-win. It's a selfless act that will actually serve both you as the doer and the receiver. Now, additionally, the yoga texts and the other Vedic scriptures are replete with Shanti mantras for everyone. I call the Shanti mantras as green mantras. Why? Because when you recite these Shanti mantras with your emotions, mind, and body focused on the mantra and the recipients to whom this Shanti mantra or the peace mantra is directed, you are providing the healing energy. You are providing the wellness. You are providing that peaceful energy. So it's not only a green mantra, it's a selfless act. So for example, think about the famous Sanskrit one-line peace mantra, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Now, just by saying it out consciously and silently, we are acknowledging that everyone and everything around us is experiencing peace and only peace. So reciting this mantra consciously is a selfless act at the level of mind and emotions. Another great example of a selfless act at the level of mind and emotions is just before you eat your food, think of the person who prepared the food. Think about the team that was involved in making the food. Think about all the universal entities in the food chain that was responsible for that plate of food in front of you. And so in your mind, just before you start eating, say out 3 times, Annadhata Sukhi Bhava, Annadhata Sukhi Bhava, Annadhata Sukhi Bhava. It's a very powerful selfless acknowledgement at the level of mind and emotions. It's giving thanks and wishing everyone in the food chain well and sending them out peace energy. In the same way, the next time when you see an ambulance or you see a fire truck speeding by, in addition to giving them the way, can you also send a silent peace mantra? Let the ambulance or the fire truck personnel be safe and reach the victim safely and on time. At the same time, let the victims be safe and receive the help ASAP. So what exactly is happening? You are providing that healing and wellness energy, that peace energy to these entities. So it becomes a selfless act at the level of mind and emotions. Similarly, notice that several of our Shanti mantras are directed towards universal or natural entities like the plants, the animals, the stars, the planets, the rains, the water, the forests. There is this beautiful Shanti mantra in the Rig Veda and the Ayurveda. It starts off with Tacham yo ravrani mahe gatum yajnaya gatum yajnapataye, and then it ends somewhere down the line. You have a phrase that says Urdvam jigatu bhesajam. What does it mean? May the plants, may the creepers, and may the life-giving medicinal plants grow in a healthy manner. Shamno astu dvipade, blessings to all the living entities with 2 feet. Sham chatushpade, blessings to all the 4-footed entities. So by reciting these green mantras or the Shanti mantras, you are providing that healing energy or the wellness energy to all these entities. So it becomes a selfless act at the level of mind and emotions. Now, the question is, how can you perform selflessness at the level of the physical body? Selflessness at the physical level involves any physical action without the feeling of doership, where the doer downplays his or her role and interest and instead considers the interests of the receiver impartially and non-judgmentally. Again, the doer must develop 2 qualities. Number 1, overcome any attachment or judgment to the task. And number 2, cultivate a loving attitude. So there should be no regrets, there should be no complaints, there should be no self-pity, there should be no hatred while performing the selfless service. Now, some examples of a selfless service at the physical level. One easy way to get started is to mentor some child that is not yours. If there are expenses that a child cannot afford, like education or for extracurricular activities, consider helping that child and his or her family with the suitable expenses. Teach some skill set for free to people who will benefit from that skill set. Provide any kind of free service to prison inmates. On your birthday, give something to the needy instead of waiting to receive something from others. If you see random trash, pick up the random trash as you walk down the street or in a park. Help the needy to cross any busy intersection. Commemorate the death anniversary of a loved one by providing a warm, fresh meal to the homeless or anybody else that is in need of a meal. This not only helps the receivers, but it also adds meaning to your loved one's death. Now, what exactly happens at the level of the brain of people that are engaged in selfless service? Now, there are numerous scientific studies on selfless service which conclude that a strong correlation exists between the well-being, happiness, health, and longevity of people who render selfless service without any expectation, as long as they feel good about performing those tasks. Researchers have reported that people who perform selfless service experience less depression, they exhibit greater life satisfaction, they are more happy, and it leads to improvements in longevity and overall health. In one longitudinal study involving high school graduates from 1957, researchers caught up with nearly 3,000 of these people when they were age 65 or longer or older. And what they found is that those who had performed selfless service throughout their 65-year period, these people lived longer compared to those who did not render any selfless service. Additionally, the participants who rendered the service only for compassionate reasons achieved the most health benefits compared to those who performed the service purely for personal growth, for personal gain or for self growth. Now, what did the researchers conclude from the study? And I'm quoting this. The researchers concluded saying that should any benefits to the self become the main motive for performing selfless service, the doer may not see any health benefits associated with the selfless service. Okay. Now, when we render selfless service, the brain actually releases several feel-good hormones. And these feel-good hormones improve your immunity at all levels, body, mind, and emotions. And in turn, they build your self-esteem. So when we help others selflessly, our brains releases hormones like oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. These hormones, they boost our mood, they counteract the effects of the stress hormone cortisol, okay? They build our immunity, and they ward off the flight or fight response. It's interesting because the release of these chemicals creates a situation called the helper's high. It's a literal state of euphoria. It's similar to a mild version of a morphine high. The only problem is the morphine high, in the benefits that come from that, they are fleeting and they are of short term, and they can be detrimental over a longer period. On the other hand, the benefits from selfless service are very safe. They are sustained as long as you continue the selfless act. Now, the health benefits from selfless service are so profound that the United Nations and several European governments are actually encouraging the citizens to volunteer and render selfless service. Now, groundbreaking work from researchers have now shed light on selfless service and its effects on the brain. These studies offer unique insights into how people decide whether to act generously or selfishly in a given scenario. Their findings provide strong evidence for a different take on human nature, one that sees generosity and selflessness as deep-rooted parts of who we are as a species. These studies suggest that intrinsically humans are selfless. There is that selfless gene in all of us, but it's just that our nature gets enveloped by the daily demands and we move away from being selfless to becoming more selfish. Researchers are also of the unanimous opinion that intrinsically people enjoy being generous, but due to certain pressures and certain circumstances, we overcome this intrinsic feature and we become more selfish. Now, it's interesting because selfless actions actually activates the area of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. This is between the eye sockets in the frontal areas of the brain. Interestingly, this is the part of the brain that is also associated with decision making, assessing the rewards, rational thoughts, reasoning, and even our full expression of personality. This is the area of the brain that gets lighted up during certain behaviors like fairness, cooperation, and reciprocity. It is that part of the brain that provides the individuals with the feelings of calm, neutral, and peace. So think of it as an intrinsically rewarding aspect of the brain. On the other hand, selfish actions activates an area of the brain called the anterior insula. This is the brain area that's been associated with negative emotions like judgment, comparison, pain, disgust, anger, fear, sadness, aversion, unfairness, indignation, uncertainty, disbelief, and social exclusion. So hormones associated with this region and these traits are stressful hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So now you understand why selfish acts are associated with an emotional burden. All right. And in another set of studies, researchers noticed that when people who are not steeped in selfless service and yet are forced to make split-second decisions about whether to act selfishly or selflessly, very often they chose the more selfless approach. And this has been shown by the orbitofrontal cortex getting lighted up. Is the immediate response when you see a child or an animal in the middle of the road and you want to save that. It's only when you're given enough time to think about the decision, okay, that's when the anterior insular lights up, your self-interest kicks in, and then you start acting selfishly. Okay. Now the question is, how do people steeped in selfless service behave, and how do they present themselves? All right. Now, based on several research studies coupled with subjective feedback, researchers concluded that there is a certain typical behavior pattern of people who are steeped in selfless service. A selfless doer will not wait for any thanks or any glorification from anybody. Okay. Number two, a selfless doer is never deterred by the outcome of a selfless action. Now, very often people complain that they are stopped offering their charitable services because the receiver did not put that to good use. Some have noticed that the money they offer, okay, to a homeless person was used for smoking or to buy drugs. Now, please remember, in all these cases, we the doers, we have forgotten one important tenet of selfless service. That is, just carry out the act. And that's it. We are not supposed to worry about the outcome. Doers who are initiating a selfless act are neither responsible nor answerable to the receiver's action following that selfless act. All right. So that's the reason why a selfless doer is never deterred by the outcome of their selfless actions. A selfless doer is an universal friend. A selfless doer gets drawn not only to humans, but also to plants, to animals, to nature, to forests, to inanimate objects. A selfless doer is always concerned about the universe and its occupants. A selfless doer is very humble and always puts others first. A simple example is a selfless doer will always feed the plants or birds or the homeless before they actually sit to eat. A selfless doer will constantly display love and empathy. In Sanskrit, we call it Maitri Karuna. They also display compassion, anukampana. There's never a judgment while rendering any act. No act is low or high. Doers will stoop low to do any kind of acts. For example, washing dishes or spending quality time with downtrodden. They go high to perform higher kinds of acts, like providing support to an institution. In all these cases, there's only love, there's only empathy, there's only enjoyment, and there's only happiness. A selfless doer will never or will rarely ever monopolize conversations by discussing their selfless acts or charities. In fact, very often people choose to be anonymous and avoid all kinds of publicity. It has become so much integral part of their life, it's like taking a shower or having a breakfast. A selfless doer is constantly seeking ways to give. Selfless doers are magnanimous givers. At the same time, they will not hold material possessions. They will not hold any property. They will not hold any materials. Instead, we call them as minimalists because these selfless doers, their wants and their needs are minimal. Their nature is dominated by give, always giving. Okay. In the Kathopanishad, while talking about the path of selfless service, Lord Yama tells Nachiketa that a selfless doer's focus is always on the welfare of others. Okay, because this selfless doer is on the path of Shreyas. Shreyas is the path of Nivritti Marga. Nivritti Marga is a path that brings long-term light, joy, happiness through ethical and moral actions. Okay, so now you may understand when we saw the definition of selfless service in the first slide, we said selfless service is an ethically fine-tuned action, and a selfless person provides this selfless service without any egoistic tendencies. Why? Because these people are on the Shreyas path, or the path of Nivritti Marga, the path that brings long-term happiness and joy. A selfless doer is always happy and at peace. Nothing perturbs them. Nothing destabilizes them. As a result, these people will always experience a state of bliss. I call it as a state of high prana. You can call it as being in the path of Shreyas or being in the Sattva. This is the state where they are always at peace, they are calm, non-judgmental, and neutral. And this is the state where you find immunity, strong immunity at all three levels of individuality: physical, mental, emotional. Okay, that's the reason why such people who render selfless service on a regular basis are always not only at optimal health, but they're very peaceful. Okay, they experience optimal health and wellness throughout their lifetime. Researchers have also noticed that selfless doers, people who render selfless services, are people who are not satisfied by offering few pennies for charity. Okay, true selfless service and its benefits results from going that extra mile. That is, you make an effort, you sacrifice your time. So writing a check is good, but it's not enough. You have to take some extra time off and perform an act, physical act. And sure enough, in several studies, the benefits from selfless service were seen only among those participants who performed selflessness at the level of thoughts and who performed selfless service regularly and frequently by going that extra mile. Okay, and just to remind you all, one important tenet of selfless service is carry out the act, and that's it. Doers are neither responsible nor answerable to the receiver's action following the selfless act. Now the question is there a gene for selfish or selfless tendencies? Now there's no clear answer to this question. Studies suggest that families contain a mixture of the selfish and the selfless genes that can be passed down through generations. And natural selection makes some in the family selfish and some selfless. Now, depending on the genotype of their parents, children may all be selfish or selfless or a combination of both. Now, researchers hone down on a particular gene that they believe is associated with selflessness. Researchers have shown that there are several variations of a gene called the COMT gene. And this COMT gene is responsible for the production of the hormones, the positive hormones, the hormones that keep you in a positive state, oxytocin and dopamine. Okay, these hormones are responsible for emotions, for bonding, for compassion, for loving kindness. And researchers noticed that people with a variation of the COMT gene, okay, they are more in tune with selfless acts. That is, they perform more charitable services, they perform more selfless acts. Now, researchers are still trying to discover other genes which can influence selfless behavior whose association has not yet been discovered, with the goal to understand who we are and why we are and how we are. Now, in my opinion, I would like to take the genetic findings with a grain of salt. My belief is that selfless service as a trait can be developed in individuals irrespective of what genes they carry. This specific behavior, in my opinion, comes through brain molding and transformation right from a young age, since our brains are neuroplastic. So the conclusion take-home message from this talk is that engage in acts of selfless service to strengthen and reinforce the emotions, the mind, and the body. People who incorporate selfless service into their daily lives strengthen their ability to resist the ego impulses and instead achieve greater happiness and fulfillment in their lives. By performing selfless service, you are inspired to do the right thing while being less impulsive or less driven to act on knee-jerk or selfish urges. Now, as you begin to decide how you can perform a selfless service, please learn to create love towards whatever you're doing. Let go of the ego, let go of any feelings of desire, ambition, fear, worry, anxiety, judgment, and anger to release any attachment to the service or its outcome. All right. So with that, let me stop the share and I'll take your questions.